December 1932. Deep in the frozen forests of the Ural Mountains, a 13-year-old boy named Pavlik Morozov became a symbol of loyalty for an entire nation and a chilling warning of betrayal. His story would be told in every school, every home, and every heart in the Soviet Union. Some would call him a hero, others a traitor, but the truth is far darker and far more tragic. In the 1930s, the Soviet Union was in the grip of monumental change. Joseph Stalin's government had launched an ambitious, brutal campaign to collectivize agriculture, forcing millions of farmers to surrender their land. Resisting meant being labeled an enemy of the people, a death sentence in Stalin's regime. In the small village of Gerasimovka, far from the Kremlin's towers, this political storm was about to tear one family apart. Pavlik Morozov was born in 1918. He grew up surrounded by the symbols of revolution, red flags, portraits of Lenin, and teachers who preached that loyalty to the state was the highest virtue. He joined the Young Pioneers, a youth organization much like the Boy Scouts, but with a critical difference. It didn't just teach wilderness survival, it taught political survival. Children were actively encouraged to report anyone who spoke against the party, even their own parents. And Pavlik, it seems, took this lesson to heart. His father, Trofim Morozov, was a village official, respected but weary of the crushing bureaucracy. Behind closed doors, he complained that Stalin's policies were destroying their way of life. One night, Pavlik overheard his father discussing a plan to falsify documents, a desperate act to help local peasants avoid being forced onto collective farms. To Pavlik's young mind, shaped by relentless propaganda, this wasn't an act of courage. It was betrayal. The next morning, Pavlik went to the local authorities and told them everything he had heard. Within days, his father was arrested. For a 13-year-old boy, it must have felt like he had done the right thing. He had proven his loyalty. He had lived up to everything he was taught to believe. But in doing so, he had just condemned his own father and shattered his family. Trofim Morozov was exiled to Siberia. Pavlik's mother was shunned by the villagers, and Pavlik himself became a paradox, famous and hated at the same time. Propaganda newspapers hailed him as the pioneer of truth. Posters with his face appeared alongside slogans praising his devotion. At school, he was celebrated as a model citizen, the boy who chose the revolution over his own blood. But in the quiet of his own home, he was utterly alone. The same villagers who applauded him in public whispered behind his back, calling him the boy who sold out his own father. Months later, a letter arrived. It was from Trofim. He wrote that he was planning to escape exile and begged his son for forgiveness and help to cross the border out of the Soviet Union. For the first time in a long time, Pavlik felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, his family could be whole again. He confided in a close friend, telling him his father was coming back. But in Stalin's Soviet Union, secrets were a dangerous currency. The friend's father overheard them and went straight to the authorities. When Trofim Morozov returned to the village, he was captured almost immediately. This time the charge was treason, a crime with only one punishment: execution. The trial was swift, the verdict inevitable. And somewhere in the back of the courtroom, Pavlik watched silently as his father was condemned to die. He thought he was serving justice. Instead, he had just served a death warrant. In the aftermath, Soviet officials seized Pavlik's story and sharpened it into a propaganda weapon. They painted him as a martyr, a child saint who chose Lenin over love. Statues were built in his honor. Children memorized poems about his courage. Schools held ceremonies where students pledged to be as brave as Pavlik Morozov. But beneath this polished, heroic image was a boy consumed by guilt and isolation. His own relatives resented him. Even his younger brother grew to fear him. By the autumn of 1932, the legend of Pavlik Morozov had swept across the nation. But the real Pavlik was already a ghost. In September of that year, Pavlik and his younger brother went to visit their grandparents in the countryside. They never came back. Days later, their bodies were discovered in a forest, stabbed repeatedly. Pavlik's red pioneer scarf, the very symbol of his loyalty, was still tied around his neck, soaked in his own blood. The official story was clean and simple. His own relatives, including his grandfather and cousins, had murdered him in revenge. 4 people were arrested, tried, and executed. For the Soviet press, it was the perfect ending. A martyr's death that proved loyalty to the state was worth dying for. But after Stalin's death, as archives slowly opened, the story began to unravel. Historians found glaring inconsistencies. Witnesses had changed their statements. The murder weapons were never clearly identified, and Pavlik's accused family members may have been tortured into confessing. Some researchers even proposed a far more sinister theory, that Pavlik was killed not by his family, but by the secret police themselves. The NKVD, this theory goes, wanted to silence him, to lock his story in place before he grew up and could question what he'd done. In death, Pavlik could be a perfect legend. In life, he was a liability. Regardless of who killed him, the Soviet state used his story for decades. He became the centerpiece of children's education. Textbooks presented him as the ideal pioneer. The message was hammered home in plays, songs, and posters. The state is your true family. Generations of Soviet children grew up believing in the myth of Pavlik Morozov. He was no longer a boy, he was an idea. The idea that loyalty to authority is more important than love. Today in Russia, the story remains controversial. Some still see him as a patriot who exposed corruption. Others see him as a tragic victim of political manipulation. His grave, once covered in flowers, is now mostly forgotten. A quiet relic of a time when betrayal could be twisted into bravery. Historians still debate what truly happened. Was he a brainwashed child, or a boy terrified into making an impossible choice? We may never know for certain, but his story reveals the terrifying power of ideology and how a government can take something as pure as a child's conscience and reshape it into a tool of control. Pavlik Morozov didn't set out to be a hero or a traitor. He was simply a boy who believed what he was told, that loyalty to the state was the highest virtue, and that even a father's love was secondary to obedience. He became both victim and symbol, a name written in history books as an example of courage, and remembered by the world as a warning. Because the real lesson of Pavlik Morozov isn't about politics. It's about humanity. A society that forces children to betray their parents has already lost its soul. He was 13 years old. He believed he was doing the right thing. And in the end, he destroyed everything, including himself. Thank you for watching. If this story made you think, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history.